Tonight, we have a guest speaker, Kunal Taravade from the US. Kunal works for the software company in Portland, Oregon, in the field of computer chip design. He's the author of many scientific papers and holds over 25 US patents. One area of interest is the impact of technology on humanity. In his talk today, Kunal will describe the concept of artificial intelligence, its uses and misuses, and the impact it has on individuals and society. With a speech entitled Artificial Intelligence, Promises, and Pearls, please help me welcome Kunal Taravade.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor and privilege to talk to you guys tonight. And I want to thank Amin for his very kind invitation to this meeting. Now, what I'd like to do is share my screen. If somebody can enable screen sharing, I would like to start sharing my presentation, if you don't mind.
Enabled. You can try.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me know if you guys can see it.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So tonight I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence, and I'm calling this talk Promises and Perils of Artificial Intelligence. And what we will cover today will be the origins of artificial intelligence, the mechanics of artificial intelligence, and the implications of why we should worry about this. Now, the topic of intelligence has intrigued human beings since ancient times. And where is the seat of intelligence? How is intelligence formed? How it works has been a topic that people have studied for centuries. The first coherent theory of brains, called the brain theory, was developed by the great Greek philosopher Plato. And here, for the first time, he explained that the brain is in fact the seat of intelligence and of consciousness, of thoughts, of ideas, of beliefs, and so on. And so this brain theory remained sort of the standard model for brains for centuries, for almost 2,000 years, until for the first time, only in the 20th century, scientists were able to understand and learn and identify the different parts of a human brain. And what they found was intriguing. They found that the brain is a dense network of cells known as neurons. These are nerve cells. And these nerve cells are connected by pathways known as synapses. And it is in fact these pathways that carry information. They carry electrical and chemical currents, and they store data and memory. So once the structure of the brain was determined and understood, naturally the first question that scientists asked in the 1950s was, can we create a computer network to mimic the processes of a brain? That's to say, things like perception and recognition. Can we create such a computer network? And of course, the technology of the 1950s was too primitive to allow such a network to be created. It took several decades, more than 50 years, for this dream of a computer network that could mimic the processing of a brain, of a human brain, was realized. It took many advances in computers, in software, in the speed of computers, in computer programming, for this dream to be finally realized. And in fact, it was realized only in the 21st century. And we see that 2007 approximately was the tipping point when the concept of artificial intelligence was first understood and actually deployed, created, designed, and implemented in a computer network. And there were three things that came together, a confluence of three things that made this possible: fast computers, fast algorithms, which are programs to process computers, and finally, lots and lots of data. And the thing that made it possible was YouTube, the advent of YouTube, and all the hundreds of thousands of pictures and videos of cats that people uploaded to YouTube. This is, in fact, what allowed computers to learn these images and became the basis for artificial intelligence for the first time in the 21st century. Now, when we look at what has been accomplished in artificial intelligence over the last 20-some years, since the beginning of the 21st century, we see three waves of artificial intelligence. The very first wave is what we could call optimization. The second wave is something that could be described as recognition, and the third wave is adaptation. And I'll describe what these are, but just for now, remember that there are three waves of artificial intelligence: optimization, recognition, and adaptation. Now, optimization is a class of problems in which you find a needle in a haystack. I'll give you a couple of examples. Chess, for example, the number of different combinations or moves in chess is 10 to the exponential power of 123. That's a huge number. And it just turns out that computers are very good at finding needles in haystacks. This is a kind of problems that is naturally suited for computers and computer networks. Another example is Go, the Chinese game Go, where the total number of moves is something like 10 to the exponential power of more than 300. The work that we do in computer chip design in my company is more complex than games of chess or Go. The total number of possible combinations for computer chip design is 10 to the exponential power of some 90,000. Now, just to give you an idea, this is more than the number of atoms in the universe. So these are extraordinarily complex problems in the field of optimization, but the computer networks tend to be very good at this particular class of problems. So now when we look at these three waves, or the three broad applications of artificial intelligence, we talked about optimization, recognition, adaptation. It turns out computers and AI, artificial intelligence, is very good at optimization. In fact, AI was used in the very early stages of vaccine research for the COVID vaccine early on to distill down the total number of chemical compounds that would be required to be investigated for a vaccine. Now, the second class of problems is recognition. It turns out AI is not as good at recognition as it is at optimization. Now, recognition is where it can take a particular element and recognize it for what it is. So for example, pictures or images or text. So when you start to type a text query in a Google window, it can recognize what you're typing and fill the rest of it out. That's a recognition problem. And it turns out AI is sort of okay there. It's not as good as it is at optimization. And the third class of problems is adaptation. And this is what the AI community is focused on today, at solving the problem of adaptation, which involves real-time adjustments, real-time decision-making for dynamic and changing situations. So for example, autonomous vehicles is an application in the field of adaptation, driverless cars. It turns out AI is not very good at this, and a lot more research needs to be done. So here, this shows us what are the things that AI can do well, and what are the things that it cannot do well. And this is important, as we'll see very shortly, because the field of artificial intelligence is full of mistakes and misuses. Now, we've seen that AI is not able to do a very good job in recognition. So here you see some examples of mistakes that AI has made in recognition. This picture on the left is a boy holding a toothbrush, but AI recognizes it as a boy holding a baseball bat, which is obviously very wrong. And then when you take a look at the images on the right, you see there are several examples of pictures that are taken in a slightly different context or with a different point of view. So for example, on the top left, you have a chair seat that is disassembled. Well, AI recognized it as an apple, a part of an apple, which obviously it isn't. On the top right, you have a hammer in a knitted wool cloth, and AI recognized it as a spaceship taking off. So obviously you can see there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential for mistakes being made in recognition. The other thing that we see when we talk about AI is the influence of technology for surveillance and for many other applications in which individual privacy is infringed. For example, China, which has almost no laws guarding privacy, personal privacy, has been able to take advantage of artificial intelligence to an extraordinary degree, much more so than Western nations, where we have very strong laws protecting individual privacy and individual rights, like certainly in Canada and the United States. But in China, they don't have such laws. And so, for example, in China, they've used artificial intelligence for something called robotic justice, in which a computer program is used to adjudicate disputes between people. China is also very big on surveillance and surveillance of massive amounts of people by storing their information digitally, their photographs, and even information about different aspects of their lives. And so this is something that is of interest to people that are involved in privacy advocacy all over the world, especially here in the West. Another thing that we've seen during COVID is the strong use of AI in surveillance. So for example, in this picture on the left, you see there's a drone with a QR code hanging from it. And in China, what they've done is they have these drones in many places. And if you want to enter a certain place, you have to scan the QR code and send back your scan result to see who you are, what you're doing, what you intend to do, and so on, before you're allowed in. And so there's this concern all over the world about the Chinese use of surveillance during COVID, which could be a means of what they're calling digital authoritarianism. Again, this is a concern here in the West. It is not as much of a concern in China, but something that privacy advocates all over the world are concerned about, governments misusing this technology for the purpose of surveillance. And this is something that we should keep in mind as we talk about the potential for misuse of AI. Now, the big question that AI brings when we look at all these applications that AI is capable of is, will AI replace us? And to answer this question, we now will look at the spectrum of all of the human occupations and professions and vocations. And what we have done is we have divided this up in a chart, on a chart. So on this chart, from top to bottom, we plot the emotional engagement required for different occupations. So the greater the engagement, the higher up on the chart it goes, from bottom to top. And from left to right, we have charted the creativity required for the different occupations. And now let me show you this chart, and let's spend a couple of minutes to familiarize ourselves with this chart. Again, you have the emotional engagement or emotional quotient, EQ, required for the different occupations plotted from bottom to top. The higher you are on that scale, the higher is the degree of emotional engagement required for that occupation. And the axis from left to right shows the creativity in the different professions. So for example, in the bottom left quadrant, you see occupations like retail sales or customer support or even bank tellers, which require relatively less degree of emotional engagement and are repetitive. And on the top right, you see occupations like social worker or nurse or therapist or parent that require very high degrees of emotional engagement. And the more you go to the right, you see things get more creative. So for example, you have artists and scientists and CEOs, small business owners moving farther to the right. Now, when we look at this particular spectrum or chart in which the different occupations are plotted, the picture becomes a little bit clearer. And now, what happens to some of these occupations and where does AI become important? So let's take a look. Well, what we will find is that occupations that are in the top half of this chart require the human touch. In these occupations, the human touch is indispensable and it cannot be replaced by artificial intelligence. In the top right quadrant, the human touch will endure, so will it on the top left. On the top left, there could be some analysis that AI can provide to improve the services in the top left quadrant. So for example, things like tour guide or in-home caregiving or tutors or counselors their jobs can be improved by doing some kind of AI analysis, but the fundamental aspect of those professions is the human touch, and that will not be replaced, and those professions will not go away. In the bottom right, you see that there are professions that could benefit from more assistance by artificial intelligence. Things like a tax attorney or news writer or fashion designer, they could benefit there. Here, there is human touch is important, but it is not as crucial as it is in the professions above in the top half of the chart. Now, when you look at the bottom left quadrant, however, here you see occupations that are in danger of being supplanted and replaced by AI. Things like bank teller, retail sales, truck driver, customer support. Those could be replaced by artificial intelligence. And so that is the overall picture that we see when we survey common human occupations and professions in the context of artificial intelligence. And so that is an important lesson that we can draw. And those of us who are engaged in the professions like yourselves, a lot of the work that you guys do in this nonprofit that Amin has set up, this very worthwhile work that is done, requires an extraordinary amount of human touch and emotional engagement and EQ. And that is simply irreplaceable. And so finally, I think I'd like to leave you with this message that AI is a very powerful technology. It is a technology that has come to fruition in the 21st century. It is a technology that is capable of doing many things. It can do certain things better than other things. And it is also a technology that can replace certain professions. But there are certain other occupations and vocations of human endeavor which can never be replaced by AI. And I would like to thank you for your attention here.